Most people would have ignored him. The old man sat in the same booth every Tuesday and Thursday at Sal's Diner off Route 9. Always ordered the meatloaf special, and always did the same strange thing. Ate exactly half, then carefully wrapped the rest in paper napkins before shuffling out into the parking lot, where his rusted Chevy waited like a faithful dog. But on a cold October morning when the maple leaves were turning rust-colored and the coffee tasted like burnt regret, Jake, Reaper, Coleman finally decided to ask why. Jake was the kind of man most people crossed the street to avoid. 6'4", 240, with a beard that hadn't seen scissors in 3 years and hands scarred from decades of bar fights and engine work. The patches on his leather vest marked him as a full member of the Devil's Highway Motorcycle Club, and the lines carved deep into his weathered face told stories most folks didn't want to hear. He'd been stopping at Sal's for years, usually alone, usually content to drink black coffee and watch the highway blur past the rain-streaked windows. But lately he'd been watching the old man instead. The guy looked ancient, maybe 75, maybe 100, hard to tell with that papery skin and those hands that trembled when they lifted the fork. He wore the same brown cardigan every visit, threadbare at the elbows, and his boots had duct tape holding the soles together. Nothing about him suggested he couldn't afford a full meal. He always paid cash, counted out exact change from a worn leather wallet. He just never ate more than half. This particular Thursday, Jake sat 3 booths down, nursing his 3rd cup of coffee while pretending to read yesterday's newspaper. The old man came in right at 11, same as always, nodded politely to Rita the waitress, and slid into his usual spot near the window. Rita didn't even ask for his order anymore, just brought the meatloaf special and a glass of water. Jake watched as the old man ate slowly, methodically, cutting each bite into precise squares. Halfway through he stopped, pulled a stack of paper napkins from the dispenser, wrapped the remaining portion with the careful attention of someone performing surgery. Then he stood, left a $5 bill on the table, exact price plus a $1 tip, and headed for the door. "Hey." Jake's voice rumbled across the diner like distant thunder. The old man stopped, turned slowly. His eyes were pale blue, watery with age, but sharp underneath. "Wary." "Yes." Jake pushed himself up from the booth. Every other conversation in the diner died. Rita froze mid-pour. Because when a man Jake's size stood up, people paid attention. He crossed the scuffed linoleum floor until he stood directly in front of the old man, the wrapped meal clutched in those trembling hands like something precious. "You come in here twice a week," Jake said quietly. "Always order the same thing. Always leave half." "What?" The old man's throat worked. "That's my business." "Maybe." Jake's voice stayed calm, but carried weight. "Or maybe you're in some kind of trouble." For a long moment, they just stood there, the massive biker and the frail old man, while the coffee machine hissed in the background, and somewhere a radio played Conway Twitty. Then the old man's shoulders sagged just slightly, and Jake saw something flicker across that weathered face. Not fear. Something deeper. "Shame, maybe." "It's for my grandson," the old man said finally, voice barely above a whisper. "He's 14. Lives with me since his mama passed 2 years back from a cancer." He looked down at the wrapped food. "I can afford 1 meal. Can't afford 2. So we split it. I eat lunch here where it's warm. Bring him dinner after school." Jake felt something tighten in his chest. "What about breakfast?" "Free lunch program at school covers that. Dinner's the hard one." The old man met Jake's eyes. "I worked 40 years at the lumber mill before my back gave out. Pension ain't much. Branson's a good kid. Straight A's. Plays basketball. But groceries got expensive, and the landlord just raised rent again and His voice cracked slightly. "I'm doing the best I can." Rita had moved closer now, dish towel twisted in her hands. 2 truckers at the counter were listening too, not even pretending otherwise. The diner had gone church quiet. Jake reached into his vest pocket, pulled out his wallet. The old man's eyes went wide. "I don't want charity," he said quickly. "Didn't tell you so you'd." "I know." Jake counted out several bills. "But here's the thing. That grandson of yours, he's gonna remember these years. Gonna remember his grandpa doing everything possible to take care of him." He held out the money. "Let him remember some full meals too." The old man stared at the cash like it might bite him. "I can't." "You can." Jake's voice went softer, almost gentle. "Because somebody helped me once when I needed it. This ain't charity. It's paying forward." Slowly, with shaking hands, The old man accepted the bills. When he looked up, tears tracked down his weathered cheeks. Jake turned away before anyone could see his own eyes getting hot, headed for the door without looking back. But Rita's voice stopped him at the threshold. "Reaper? Your coffee's on the house today." He nodded once, then pushed through into the autumn cold where his Harley waited, chrome gleaming like a promise. He didn't know yet that this simple moment would spiral into something much bigger. Didn't know that before the week ended, he'd discover exactly how deep the old man's troubles ran, and how far some people would go to protect what they thought was theirs. Jake couldn't get the old man out of his head. That night at the Devil's Highway Clubhouse, he sat at the bar nursing a beer while his brothers played pool and argued about carburetor rebuilds. But his mind kept circling back to those trembling hands wrapping half a meatloaf in paper napkins. "You're quiet tonight," Ox said, dropping onto the stool beside him. Ox ran the club's books, 6'2" of solid muscle with an accounting degree he never talked about. "Something eating you." Jake told him about the old man, about the grandson, about the pension that didn't stretch far enough. Ox listened without interrupting, then asked the question Jake had been avoiding. "You get his name?" "Walter. Walter Price." Ox pulled out his phone, fingers moving across the screen. After a minute his expression darkened. "Found him. Lives over on Elm Street." More scrolling. "Jake, you need to see this." The screen showed a property record. Walter Price's house, a small 2-bedroom built in the 60s, had a foreclosure notice filed against it. Ox kept digging, pulling up county records with the kind of efficiency that reminded Jake why you didn't mess with the club's money guy. "Landlord's a company called Riverside Property Holdings," Ox said. "Owns half the rental houses in town. Been systematically raising rents, waiting for tenants to fall behind, then seizing properties." He looked up. "They filed eviction papers on Walter 3 days ago. He's got 2 weeks. Jake's hand tightened around his beer bottle. "He's raising a kid in that house." "Yeah." Ox's jaw set. "And Riverside doesn't care. Owner's a guy named Martin Cross. Real estate developer. Buys up cheap properties, flips them, makes millions while people like Walter end up on the street." Something cold and hard settled in Jake's chest. He'd spent 40 years watching people like Martin Cross step on people like Walter Price. Had told himself 1,000 times it wasn't his fight. But sitting there in the warm clubhouse, thinking about a 14-year-old kid who didn't know he was about to lose the only home he had left. "Where's Cross live?" Jake asked quietly. Ox's eyebrows rose. "Gated community up on Ridgeline. Big house. Security cameras. Not exactly biker-friendly territory. I'm not going there to cause trouble." Jake stood. "I'm going to have a conversation." "Jake." "Peaceful conversation," Jake said firmly. "Just gonna explain why he should reconsider the eviction." 20 minutes later, Jake's Harley growled up the winding roads toward Ridgeline Estates. The guard at the gate took one look at him and reached for the phone. But Jake just waited patiently until a sleek Mercedes pulled up behind him. The driver, some lawyer type in an expensive suit, vouched for Jake with a nod, probably figured any delay would affect his own schedule. Martin Cross's house loomed at the end of a cul-de-sac, all glass and steel and carefully landscaped perfection. Jake parked his bike in the circular driveway, walked up to the front door, and knocked. Hard. The man who answered was mid-50s, soft around the middle, wearing a polo shirt that probably cost more than Walter's monthly rent. His expression went from annoyed to nervous when he saw Jake filling his doorway. "Can I help you?" His voice tried for authority, but landed somewhere around uncertain. "Martin Cross." "Who's asking?" "Name's Jake Coleman. I'm here about Walter Price." Cross's face hardened. "I have nothing to discuss with you. That matter is being handled through proper legal channels." "See, that's where you're wrong." Jake kept his voice level. "Because you're about to kick a 75-year-old man and his grandson out of their home right before winter. That ain't legal channels. That's cruelty. Mr. Price is 3 months behind on rent. Because you raised it 40%. Jake took one step forward. Not threatening, just present. Man worked 40 years at the lumber mill. Raised his own kids. Now he's raising his grandson because cancer took the boy's mother. And you're gonna put them on the street for profit. Cross's jaw tightened. "I run a business, not a charity. If Price can't afford market rates." "Market rates?" Jake's laugh had no humor in it. "You bought that house for $30,000 5 years ago. You've collected over $60 in rent since then. How much more profit you need? I don't have to justify my business decisions to you." Cross reached for his phone. "Leave now, or I'm calling the police." Jake didn't move. Just stood there, silent and immovable, until Cross looked up from his phone and really saw him. Saw the patches on his vest. Saw the scars on his knuckles. Saw the kind of man who didn't back down just because someone made a phone call. "Here's what's gonna happen," Jake said quietly. "You're gonna tear up those eviction papers. You're gonna let Walter and his grandson stay in that house. And you're gonna drop the rent back to what it was before you got greedy." Cross's face flushed red. "Or what? You'll threaten me? Assault me? I'll have you arrested so fast. I ain't threatening anybody." Jake's voice stayed calm as winter ice. "Just explaining consequences. Because that old man, he's under my protection now. Which means he's under the Devil's Highway's protection. And we take care of our own." The color drained from Cross's face. Everyone in town knew about the Devil's Highway. Knew they didn't start trouble, but they damn sure finished it. "You can't. Already did." Jake turned toward his bike. "You've got until Monday to make this right. After that," he looked back over his shoulder. "Well, let's just say your business operations might experience some complications." He rode away, leaving Cross standing in his expensive doorway, phone clutched in one shaking hand. By the time Jake got back to the clubhouse, word had already spread. Brothers were gathering, engines rumbling to life in the parking lot. Because when one of their own drew a line, they all stood behind it. Ox met him at the door, grinning. "Heard you put the fear of God into Martin Cross." "Just had a conversation," Jake said. "Yeah, well, that conversation's about to get a lot louder." Ox gestured to the growing crowd of bikers. "Brothers want to pay Mr. Cross another visit. Make sure he understood the message." Jake shook his head. "Not yet. Give him till Monday. Man deserves a chance to do the right thing." But even as he said it, Jake knew guys like Martin Cross rarely did the right thing unless forced. Which meant come Monday morning, things were likely to get interesting. He just hoped Walter and his grandson were ready for what came next. Monday morning arrived cold and gray, the kind of October day that promised winter wasn't far behind. Jake sat at Sal's diner, nursing black coffee and watching the door, waiting to see if Walter Price would show up for his usual Thursday routine 3 days early, or if Martin Cross had already made his move. At 10:30, Rita slid into the booth across from him. "Heard what you did," she said quietly. "Whole town's talking about it." Jake shrugged. "Just had a conversation. Jake Coleman, you threatened one of the richest men in the county." But Rita was smiling. "Walter came in Saturday. Ordered 2 full meals to go. Left me a $20 tip. Said an angel on a motorcycle had given him enough to feed his grandson proper for a month." Something warm spread through Jake's chest, but before he could respond, his phone buzzed. "Text from Ox. You need to see this." The attached link led to a local news site. The headline made Jake's coffee go cold. "Local developer announces affordable housing initiative." The article explained that Martin Cross of Riverside Property Holdings had announced a new program to provide below-market rent for senior citizens and families in need. Effective immediately, all current tenants facing eviction would have their cases dismissed and their rent reduced to affordable rates. Cross cited a renewed commitment to community values as his motivation. Jake read it twice, then looked up to find Rita watching him with knowing eyes. "Think you had something to do with that?" she asked. Maybe he just grew a conscience. Or maybe he realized some things matter more than profit. She patted his scarred hand. "Either way, Walter and his grandson get to stay home." By Thursday, the diner was more crowded than usual. Jake noticed it the moment he walked in. Folks who normally ate elsewhere had found reasons to stop by Sal's. The booth 3 down from his held a woman he recognized from the hardware store. 2 booths over, a couple he'd never seen before. And at the counter, Martin Cross himself sat hunched over coffee, looking like a man who'd spent several sleepless nights reconsidering his life choices. Their eyes met. Cross flinched slightly, but Jake just nodded once, acknowledgement, not threat, and took his usual seat. At exactly 11 o'clock, Walter Price shuffled through the door. But this time his grandson walked beside him, a lanky kid in a too small jacket and basketball shoes that had seen better days, with his grandfather's pale blue eyes and a smile that could light up Nebraska. Rita seated them at a booth near the window. 2 meatloaf specials?" she asked. Walter nodded, and Jake watched as the old man's hand found his grandson's across the table. Watched as they bowed their heads briefly. Grace, probably, thanking whatever God watched over people like them. When they looked up, Walter's gaze found Jake's across the diner. The old man stood slowly, said something to his grandson, then walked over to Jake's booth. Up close, he looked different. Still old, still worn down by life, but standing straighter somehow. Like weight had been lifted. "Mr. Coleman," Walter said quietly. "Just Jake." "Jake, then." Walter's voice cracked slightly. "My landlord called me. Said he was dropping the eviction, lowering my rent. I asked him why, and he said." Walter smiled. "He said sometimes you gotta be reminded what matters." Jake looked past him to where the kid sat watching, protective worry in those young eyes. "Your grandson know what almost happened?" "No." Didn't want to scare him. Walter's hands trembled, but his voice stayed firm. "But I know. And I know we stopped it." He held out his hand. "Don't have words big enough to thank you." Jake shook the offered hand carefully, aware of how fragile those bones felt. "You'd have done the same." "Maybe. But you actually did it." Walter's eyes glistened. "You gave my grandson his home back. That's everything." After Walter returned to his booth, Jake sat there watching them eat. 2 full meals, no napkin wrap leftovers, and felt something shift inside his chest. Something that had been hard and closed for longer than he cared to remember. Rita appeared with fresh coffee. "You did good, Reaper. Just had a conversation. Keep telling yourself that." She winked. "But we both know you're softer than that leather vest suggests." When Jake finally stood to leave, he stopped by Walter's booth. The grandson looked up at him with curious eyes, not afraid, just interested in the massive biker who'd made his grandfather smile more than usual. "You play basketball?" Jake asked the kid. "Yes, sir. Point guard." "Any good?" The boy's grin was pure teenage confidence. "Pretty good. Keep at it. And keep those grades up." Jake looked at Walter. "Your grandpa's proud of you. Don't ever forget that." Outside, the autumn sun had broken through the clouds, turning the parking lot chrome into scattered diamonds. Jake's Harley sat waiting, patient and faithful. He threw his leg over the seat and fired up the engine, feeling that familiar thunder rumble through his bones. As he pulled onto Route 9, heading nowhere in particular, Jake thought about the old man eating a full meal with his grandson. Thought about Martin Cross sitting at the counter, maybe learning that profit wasn't everything. Thought about how one simple question, why, had changed more than he'd expected. His phone buzzed. Text from Ox. "Brothers want to buy you a drink tonight. Celebrate the victory." Jake smiled beneath his beard. Maybe he'd take them up on it. Maybe he'd tell them about Walter and the kid, and how sometimes the biggest battles were fought in small diners over half-eaten meals. Or maybe he'd just ride for a while, letting the highway stretch out before him like a promise, knowing that somewhere behind him an old man and his grandson were safe, warm, and fed. The Devil's Highway Motorcycle Club roared on toward whatever came next, chrome gleaming in the afternoon light. And Jake, Reaper, Coleman rode with them, his reputation intact, but his heart a little less heavy than before. Because he'd learned something important these past few days. Sometimes the scariest-looking man in the room was exactly who you needed on your side. And sometimes asking why was the bravest thing you could do. The engine thundered. The highway called. And somewhere in a small diner off Route 9, 2 people who'd been struggling alone finally had enough. That, Jake figured, was worth more than all the miles he'd ever ridden.